Drop it! Get on the ground, now!
Officer, it's a camera. I'm not a threat.
I don't care what you say, hands down, now!
I'm a retired Army major. I have ID. You need to slow down.
Stop resisting!
I'm not resisting. Look at what I'm holding.
Do this to yourself!
Officer Derek Vance had been wearing the badge of the Austin Police Department for just over 6 years when he made the decision that would implode his career and cost the city's taxpayers a staggering $1.3 million. He was 29 years old, a man in the prime of his physical life, but possessed of a temperament that confused authority with aggression. He walked the beat with a swagger that made the veteran officers on the force uneasy, the kind of young cop who viewed every citizen interaction as a contest of dominance that he was required to win. On a crisp, bright Tuesday morning in October, Vance received a dispatch call regarding a suspicious individual lurking in the tree line of Riverside Park. The suspicious individual in question was Major Marcus Thorne, United States Army retired, a 55-year-old black man who had spent a quarter of a century serving his country, leading young men and women through some of the most hostile terrain on God's green earth. What Officer Vance did next, ignoring standard procedure, disregarding a calm demeanor, and driving a decorated disabled veteran face first into the hard Texas soil, would become a viral testament to how quickly unchecked ego combined with implicit bias can shatter a community's trust. Before we dig into the details of this injustice, I want to ask, where are you folks watching from today? If this is your first time joining us, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one act as a mirror to our society, and we can't fix what we refuse to look at. Your support helps us keep the lights on, and the truth loud and clear. Riverside Park is the crown jewel of the neighborhood, a sprawling stretch of green oaks and pecan trees that runs along the Colorado River. It's the sort of place where retirees walk their golden retrievers at dawn and young parents push strollers in the afternoon. It's peaceful. It's safe. Or at least it's supposed to be. It was 10:15 a.m. The sun was high and bright, casting long shadows through the branches. The humidity had finally broken, leaving the air crisp and clean. Major Marcus Thorne had been at the park since 900 a.m. He was a man of discipline, a trait burned into his bones during 25 years in the Army Rangers. Even in retirement, he kept his hair high and tight, his clothes pressed and his boots polished. But today, he wasn't dressed for inspection. He was wearing comfortable cargo pants, a breathable tan hiking shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat to keep the sun off his neck. To the casual observer, he looked like exactly what he was, a middle-aged man enjoying a quiet morning. But Derek Vance wasn't a casual observer. He was a hammer looking for a nail. When the call came in, Vance was already agitated, having spent the morning dealing with a traffic dispute that hadn't gone his way. He heard the dispatcher's voice. Subject is a black male, approximately 50 years of age, loitering near the walking trail, possibly armed with a long-barreled object. And his mind immediately painted a picture. He didn't hear walking trail. He didn't hear possibly. He heard armed black male. And as he hit the lights and sirens speeding toward Riverside Park, Officer Vance decided right then and there how this encounter was going to end. He didn't know he was rushing to confront a man who had forgotten more about rules of engagement than Vance would ever learn. He didn't know he was about to make a mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Major Marcus Thorne had retired from active duty 4 years prior, carrying with him the Silver Star for gallantry in action and a lumbar spine that screamed in protest every time the weather changed. The transition to civilian life hadn't been seamless. When you spend 2.5 decades operating at the highest level of alertness, silence can feel heavy. His VA therapist had suggested finding a hobby that required focus and patience but offered tranquility. "Birding," she'd said. "It forces you to look at the details, Major. It grounds you." Thorne had been skeptical at first, but he found that tracking the flight of a hawk or waiting for a heron to strike gave his mind a similar tactical satisfaction to a mission without the gunfire. He'd invested in a high-quality Canon camera and a heavy professional-grade telephoto lens white about 18 inches long, and mounted on a monopod for stability. That Tuesday morning, Thorne was tracking a pair of crested caracaras nesting near the riverbank. It was delicate work. You had to be still. You had to control your breathing. He was completely absorbed in the viewfinder, his world narrowed down to the majestic interplay of feathers and light. He wasn't thinking about his race. He wasn't thinking about how he appeared to the outside world. He was just a man finding peace in nature. The camera equipment was heavy, resting on his shoulder when he moved the lens pointing down. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a hunter stepping carefully to avoid snapping twigs. To anyone who knew what they were looking at, Thorne was obviously a photographer. But the lens through which America views black men in public spaces is often distorted by fear and ignorance. Thorne had chosen a spot near a dense thicket of brush because it offered the best vantage point for the nest. He wasn't hiding. He was positioning. He had a bottle of water in his cargo pocket and his wallet in his back pocket containing his driver's license and his retired military identification card. He felt safe here. He had fought for the freedoms that allowed citizens to enjoy parks like this. He believed, perhaps naively, that his service shielded him from the indignities he saw on the news. He believed that if he followed the law, minding his own business, the world would leave him be. He was wrong. The trouble began not with the police, but with a civilian. Sheila Hannes, 48 years old, was a resident of the upscale neighborhood bordering the park. She was walking her terrier, as she did every morning, scanning her surroundings with a vigilance that bordered on paranoia. Sheila prided herself on being the eyes and ears of the community. She was the administrator of the local Neighborhood Watch Facebook group, a platform she frequently used to report suspicious vehicles, usually delivery trucks driven by people of color and unfamiliar faces. When Sheila rounded the bend in the path and saw Marcus Thorne standing near the trees, her instinct wasn't curiosity, it was immediate alarm. She stopped about 50 yards away, squinting against the sunlight. She didn't see a camera. She didn't see a bird watcher. She saw a large black man in tactical-looking clothing, cargo pants, holding a long black and white metal object that she couldn't identify. In her mind, fed by sensationalist news and deep-seated bias, the object became a weapon. Maybe a rifle. Maybe a scope. She didn't wait to verify. She didn't walk closer to ask a friendly question. She pulled her phone from her Lululemon leggings and dialed 911, her heart racing with a self-manufactured panic. 911, what is your emergency? Yes, I'm at Riverside Park near the north entrance, Sheila said, her voice trembling with breathless urgency. There's a man here, a black man. He's hiding in the bushes and he has something large in his hands. It looks like a gun or a launcher of some kind. He's aiming it at the houses. The dispatcher remained calm. Ma'am, is he pointing a weapon at a person? He's pointing it everywhere. Sheila lied, escalating the threat to ensure a faster response. He's acting very strange. He's crouching down and then standing up. I don't feel safe. There are children in this park. You need to send someone right now before he hurts someone. We have officers en route, ma'am. Can you describe him? He's tall, wearing military clothes. He looks like he's on a mission or something. Please hurry. Sheila hung up and retreated behind a large oak tree, holding her phone up to record, convinced she was documenting a crime in progress. She didn't realize she was setting the stage for an assault on an innocent man. She watched as Thorne shifted his position, lifting the camera to his eye to track a bird. See? She whispered to her camera. He's taking aim. Officer Derek Vance was less than 2 miles away when the call was updated with Sheila's exaggerated details. Suspect is in military-style clothing, possibly targeting civilians. That was all Vance needed to hear. He had been with the department for 6 years, and in that time he had accumulated a personnel file that should have been a warning sign to any competent supervisor. 7 complaints. 7 times citizens had reported him for rudeness, excessive aggression, or escalating minor infractions into physical confrontations. 5 of those complaints came from Black or Hispanic residents. All of them had been dismissed as unfounded or within policy by a chain of command that prioritized protecting their own over correcting behavior. Vance was known in the precinct as a go-getter. He wrote a lot of tickets. He made a lot of arrests. His superiors praised his metrics, but often added footnotes in his annual reviews suggesting he work on community rapport. Vance didn't care about rapport. He cared about control. As he steered his patrol cruiser around the winding roads leading to the park, his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He wasn't thinking about de-escalation tactics. He wasn't thinking about the possibility of a misunderstanding. He was visualizing a takedown. He was preparing for a firefight. He didn't wait for backup. The protocol for a potential active shooter or armed subject suggested waiting for a second unit, but Vance wanted to be the hero. He wanted to be the one who neutralized the threat. He parked his car aggressively on the grass near the trail entrance, not bothering with a designated spot. He exited the vehicle, unsnapping the retention strap on his holster. He didn't draw his weapon yet, but his hand hovered over it ready. He scanned the park, his adrenaline spiking. When he spotted Thorne near the tree line, back turned to the officer holding the long monopod and lens, Vance didn't pause to assess. He didn't use his radio to call out observations. He just reacted. He started running toward Thorne, shouting before he was even in earshot. The die was cast. The tragedy was in motion. Major Thorne was tracking the Caracara as it banked left, his focus absolute. The world was silent except for the wind in the leaves. Then that silence was shattered by a scream from behind him. "Police, drop it! Drop it now!" Thorne didn't flinch. He didn't panic. 25 years of combat experience meant that sudden noise didn't make him jump. It made him assess. He lowered the camera slowly, resting the base of the monopod on the ground, and turned his head. He saw a young officer, red-faced, sprinting toward him, hand on his gun. Thorne recognized the posture immediately. Aggression. Fear. Poor discipline. "Hands where I can see them! Get on the ground!" Vance bellowed, stopping 20 feet away, his chest heaving. Thorne kept his hands visible away from his body. He spoke with the calm, projecting voice of a commander addressing a subordinate. "Officer, I am moving slowly. I am holding a camera. I am a birdwatcher. I don't care what you say. Drop the weapon and get on your knees." Vance was vibrating with tension. He couldn't see the lens clearly from his angle. He just saw a black metal tube. "It is a Canon camera lens, son," Thorne said, his voice steady, refusing to be treated like a criminal. "I am Major Marcus Thorne, U.S. Army retired. I have identification in my back pocket. There is no need for shouting." Vance heard the tone of authority in Thorne's voice, and it infuriated him. In his mind, a suspect was supposed to be cowering, not lecturing him. He closed the distance rapidly. "I said get on the ground. Do it now, or I will make you—" "I have a spinal injury from service," Thorne explained, still standing tall, dignity radiating from him. "I cannot get on the ground easily. I am happy to cooperate, but you need to calm down and look at what I am holding." Vance reached him. He didn't look at the camera. He didn't look at the expensive glass or the strap. He saw a black man refusing a command. He grabbed Thorne's left arm and twisted it behind his back. "Hey!" Thorne grunted, pain shooting through his shoulder. "I am not resisting. Look at the equipment." "Stop resisting!" Vance screamed, reciting the lines he'd been taught to shout for the body camera recording. He kicked Thorne's legs out from under him. A leg sweep on a 55-year-old disabled veteran. Thorne hit the ground hard. His camera flew from his grip, the $2,000 lens smashing against a rock. The impact knocked the wind out of him, jarring his fused vertebrae. Pain exploded in his lower back, white-hot and blinding. Officer Vance dropped his knee onto Thorne's back, right onto the surgical scar where shrapnel had been removed a decade earlier. He pressed his full weight down, grinding Thorne into the dirt. You are under arrest for failure to comply and resisting an officer, Vance panted, wrestling Thorne's other arm back. I am not resisting. Thorne gasped, his face pressed into the mulch. You are making a mistake, officer. Check my ID. Check the camera. By now, people had stopped. A group of joggers, a young couple, and yes, Sheila Hannes, who had come closer expecting to see a gun, but now seeing a shattered camera lens lying in the dust. He's just taking pictures, a woman in a tracksuit yelled from the path. That's a camera. Why are you hurting him? Back up, Vance yelled at the civilians, sweat dripping into his eyes. Stay back. He's a veteran, another man shouted, holding up his phone to record. I talked to him earlier. He's retired Army. Get off him. Vance ignored them. He cinched the handcuffs too tight around Thorne's wrists. The metal bit into the skin. He yanked Thorne up to a seated position, but Thorne cried out in pain as his back seized up. I told you. My spine. Thorne winced, his breathing shallow. Should have thought of that before you disobeyed. Vance sneered. He walked over to the weapon lying in the dirt. He picked it up. It was heavy. He turned it over. Cannon. 400 mm. Vance stared at the object. The glass was shattered. It wasn't a gun. It wasn't a launcher. It was exactly what the man had said it was. A cold pit formed in Vance's stomach, but he couldn't back down now. He had an audience. He had to be right. It could be a disguise, he muttered to himself, desperate to justify the violence. The sound of a second siren cut through the tension. A supervisor's SUV pulled up to the curb. Sergeant Miller, a veteran officer with 20 years on the force, stepped out. Miller was a good cop, the kind who knew the neighborhood and knew his officers. He saw the crowd filming. He saw Vance standing over a seated man. He saw the broken camera equipment. Miller walked briskly to the scene. Vance, what do we have? Suspect was reported armed, Sarge. Refused commands. Resisted arrest. I secured him. Miller looked at Thorne. He saw the haircut. He saw the bearing even in pain. He saw the Ranger tab tattoo on Thorne's forearm, faded but visible. Sir, Miller said, addressing Thorne. Are you injured? My back, Thorne gritted out. Fused vertebrae, L4 and L5. Your officer kicked my legs out. Miller's eyes widened. He turned to Vance. You swept a man with a back injury. He wouldn't get down, Sarge. Did you check him for weapons? Miller asked, his voice dropping. I haven't searched him yet. I secured the scene. Miller knelt beside Thorne. Sir, I'm going to check your pockets for ID. Is that all right? Back right pocket, Thorne whispered. Miller pulled out the leather wallet. He opened it. He saw the Texas driver's license. Then he saw the Department of Defense retiree ID. Rank Major. Miller closed his eyes for a second, inhaling a sharp breath. He looked at the shattered camera lens. He looked at the crowd, now numbering 20 people, all with phones raised. He stood up and looked at Vance with a gaze that could peel paint. Vance, unlock these cuffs. Now. But Sarge, Now, officer, Miller barked. Vance fumbled for his keys. He undid the cuffs. Thorne rubbed his wrists, deep red grooves already forming. Sir, do you need an ambulance? Miller asked, offering a hand to help Thorne up, but stopping when he saw Thorne wince. Yes, Thorne said quietly. I think something is broken. Miller keyed his radio. Dispatch, send EMS to my location. Priority. Officer involved injury. He turned to Vance. Get in your car. Do not speak to anyone. Do not say a word. Just sit there. Vance walked to his cruiser, head down. The adrenaline was gone. The silence of the park was heavy, broken only by the whispers of the witnesses. They arrested a hero, someone said, for nothing. The video hit the internet before Thorne was even loaded into the ambulance. It was titled, Austin Police Assault Elderly Veteran Birdwatcher. By the time Major Thorne was being x-rayed at the hospital confirming a refracture of his L4 vertebrae, the clip had 2 million views. It showed everything: the calm stance of the major, the screaming officer, the kick, the smash of the camera, the crowd pleading. The backlash was nuclear. The Austin Police Department's phone lines jammed within an hour. The mayor called a press conference that evening. The chief of police, usually defensive of his officers, watched the body cam footage and the civilian video and simply shook his head. There was no spinning this. There was no context that made it okay. Major Thorne required surgery to repair the damage to his back. He spent 3 weeks in the hospital and months in physical rehabilitation. The humiliation of being treated like a criminal in front of his community was a wound that healed slower than the bone. Civil rights attorneys lined up to represent him. The lawsuit they filed was blistering. It cited excessive force, unlawful arrest violation of civil rights, and failure to supervise. It pointed out Vance's 7 prior complaints. It named Sheila Hannes for filing a false report, though she was not a government actor. Her name became synonymous with the safety that endangers others. The city attorneys took one look at the case and waved the white flag. They didn't want this in front of a jury. They didn't want Major Thorne in his dress uniform testifying about how he survived Afghanistan only to be broken in a park by a rookie cop. 10 months later, the settlement was announced. $1.3 million paid to Major Marcus Thorne. It was the largest individual settlement for a non-lethal force case in the city's history. Officer Derek Vance was fired 3 weeks after the incident. The internal affairs investigation was brutal. It concluded that he had violated 6 different policies, including de-escalation use of force and professional conduct. His appeal was denied. He was stripped of his certification, ensuring he could never work as a police officer in the state of Texas again. At 29, he was unemployed, branded a disgrace, and facing his own demons. Sheila Hannes was charged with filing a false police report, a misdemeanor. She pleaded no contest, paid a fine, and moved out of the neighborhood after being socially ostracized by the very community she claimed to protect. But money doesn't fix a back, and firing an officer doesn't erase the memory of a boot on your spine. Major Thorne eventually returned to Riverside Park. He bought a new camera. He walks with a cane now, a permanent reminder of that Tuesday morning. He still watches the birds. He says they are the only ones who don't judge him before they know him. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many Major Thornes are out there who didn't have a crowd filming? How many didn't have a badge in their pocket to prove their worth? We have to be better than this. We have to demand that the people we give guns and badges to have the temperament to use them wisely. What do you folks think? Should officers like Vance face criminal charges, not just firing? Drop a comment below. And if you believe in justice for veterans and accountability for police, please like this video and share it. It helps us keep the truth alive. Until next time, take care of each other.
Step away from the camera. Now.
What are you surveilling in this neighborhood?
I'm photographing wildlife in a public park. That's a protected activity.
You don't get to debate.
Show me ID or you're detained.
You have no probable cause. Touch me and you're violating the Constitution.
Turn around, hands behind your back. This is happening.
Officer Derek Thorne had been patrolling the streets of the Metro Precinct for 9 years when he made the decision that would implode his career, humiliate his department, and cost the city taxpayers $6.8 million. He was 34 years old, a man in the prime of his physical life, with a personnel file that looked impressive on paper if you didn't read between the lines. He was known among his peers as a hunter, an officer who generated numbers, made arrests, and kept the streets clear of anyone he deemed undesirable. But on a bright Tuesday morning in October, Thorne walked into a situation where his aggressive instincts would collide with a wall of federal authority that he was woefully unprepared to scale. He was convinced his judgment was absolute, a common fatal flaw in officers who have spent nearly a decade unchecked. What happened that morning at Oakhaven Park wasn't just a mistake. It was a systemic failure of discretion. Thorne received a dispatch call about a suspicious male conducting surveillance, and instead of investigating, he escalated. He didn't know that the man standing by the pond dismantling a $12,000 camera lens was Marcus Sterling, a 54-year-old senior media advisor for the Department of Justice. Sterling was a man who spent his days crafting the public image of the Attorney General and ensuring that federal law enforcement adhered to the highest standards of constitutional integrity. What Thorne did next, mocking Sterling's explanations, destroying government property, and arresting a high-ranking federal official in front of rolling cameras, would become a case study in police misconduct taught in law schools across the country. Before we dive into the details of this catastrophic encounter, where are you watching from? If you believe that accountability is the only way to fix a broken system, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be told, and your support helps us keep the spotlight on the truth. To understand how this happened, you have to understand Officer Derek Thorne. He wasn't a rookie. He had 9 years on the job. In that time, he had accumulated 14 citizen complaints. Most involved discourtesy or bias-based policing. Yet Thorne remained on the street. His supervisors valued his metrics. He wrote tickets. He cleared corners. He was the guy you called when you wanted a problem to disappear. He had been conditioned to believe that his badge gave him the final word in every conversation. He operated on a simple binary logic. If you are a law-abiding citizen, you do exactly what I say immediately. If you hesitate, you are a suspect. If you argue, you are resisting. Thorne had a history of misinterpreting constitutional rights as insubordination. 2 years prior, he had detained a contractor for casing a house that the man was actually hired to paint. The complaint was dismissed as exonerated because the department ruled Thorne had acted in good faith. That good faith was a shield that Thorne wore like armor. It made him feel invincible. It made him feel that he could walk into Oakhaven Park, see a black man in a suit holding a camera, and decide without a shred of evidence that a crime was in progress. He parked his cruiser on the grass, a violation of park rules itself, and stepped out, adjusting his belt, ready to dominate a situation that required nothing more than a conversation. He didn't know it yet, but the clock on his career had just started its final countdown. Oakhaven Park is a sprawling green oasis in the center of the city, known for its weeping willows and the large serene pond that anchors the landscape. It is a place where corporate professionals go to escape the grind of the downtown high-rises, unbutton their collars, and breathe for an hour before returning to the fray. On this particular Tuesday, the sun was high, the air was crisp, and the park was dotted with people eating sandwiches on benches or walking dogs. It was the kind of day that photographers dream of: perfect, diffused light filtering through the turning autumn leaves. Marcus Sterling stood near the edge of the water, a figure of calm precision. At 54 years old, Sterling carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who has nothing to prove. He was dressed in a charcoal bespoke suit, the jacket draped carefully over a nearby bench, his white dress shirt crisp against his dark skin. He wasn't just a government employee. He was a titan in the world of federal communications. For 25 years, Sterling had navigated the corridors of the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., before transferring to the regional office to oversee media strategy for the Western District. He had written speeches for attorneys general managed crisis communications during national riots and advised on the optics of federal consent decrees. He knew the Fourth Amendment better than most constitutional scholars because he had spent a career explaining it to the press. But today, Marcus Sterling wasn't thinking about federal statutes or press briefings. He was thinking about mallards. Photography was his sanctuary, a hobby he had picked up to manage the immense stress of his job. He wasn't using an iPhone. Mounted on a carbon fiber tripod was a Canon R3 with a 600mm prime lens, a piece of glass worth more than most used cars. He was tracking a pair of migrating ducks, waiting for the moment they lifted off the water. His movements were slow and deliberate. He checked his histogram, adjusted his shutter speed, and waited. He was completely absorbed in the natural world, a brief respite from a world of indictments and press conferences. To anyone paying attention, Sterling looked exactly like what he was, a successful professional enjoying a high-end hobby on his lunch break. His DOJ credentials and badge were tucked into his breast pocket close to his heart, a habit from decades of service. He had parked his sedan legally in the lot. He had set up his equipment in a public space where photography was explicitly permitted. He was bothering no one. He hadn't spoken to a soul since arriving. He was simply a man at peace, capturing the beauty of nature in a city that often moved too fast to notice it. However, peace is a fragile thing when viewed through the lens of prejudice. Sterling was accustomed to being watched. He was a black man in America who had climbed to the highest echelons of government. He knew that his presence in certain spaces often drew scrutiny, but he also knew the law. He knew that standing in a public park photographing wildlife was a constitutionally protected activity. He had literally written the DOJ guidelines on the right to record in public. He assumed, perhaps too optimistically, that his professional attire and obvious photography gear would insulate him from the kind of harassment he had fought against for his entire career. He was wrong. The trouble began not with a crime, but with a window. Alara Vance lived in one of the stately Victorian homes that lined the perimeter of Oakhaven Park. At 48 years old, Alara spent a significant amount of her time monitoring the Neighborhood Association app and watching the street from her second-story sunroom. She was a woman who prided herself on being the eyes and ears of the community, a self-appointed guardian of a neighborhood that was statistically one of the safest in the state. However, her definition of safety often relied on a rigid exclusionary view of who belonged and who did not. That Tuesday, Alara was sipping herbal tea when she spotted Marcus Sterling through the trees. She didn't see a federal advisor on his lunch break. She didn't see a nature photographer. She saw a black man with a massive weapon-like device pointed at the houses. In her mind, the telephoto lens wasn't for ducks. It was for casing homes. It was for zooming in on alarm keypads and bedroom windows. She watched him for 5 minutes, her anxiety spiraling into a narrative of imminent danger. She ignored the fact that he was facing the pond. She ignored his suit. She ignored the public setting. Alara picked up her phone and dialed the police non-emergency line, a number she had on speed dial. Her voice was trembling with a manufactured fear that she had convinced herself was real. "I need to report suspicious activity at Oakhaven Park," she told the dispatcher. "Can you describe the activity, ma'am?" the dispatcher asked, typing effectively on autopilot. "There is a man, an African-American man, standing near the pond. He has this huge equipment. It looks like a high-powered camera or a scope. He's pointing it at the houses on Elm Street. I think he's conducting surveillance. He's been there for 20 minutes just watching us." The dispatcher paused. "Is he threatening anyone? Is he on private property?" "He's in the park, but he's looking at our houses," Alara insisted, her voice rising. "He's dressed up maybe to blend in. It looks very professional, like he's planning something. We have had package thefts recently, and I don't feel safe with him documenting our daily routines. Can you please send an officer to check him out? He clearly doesn't live here." The phrase "conducting surveillance" was the trigger. It stripped the context of birdwatching and replaced it with a criminal implication. The call was logged and dispatched. However, as information moved from Alara to the dispatcher and finally to the computer in Officer Thorne's cruiser, the nuance evaporated completely. Thorne looked at his terminal. The text read, "Suspicious person, male black, dark suit, possibly photographing residences, casing targets. Complainant states. Sub J has surveillance equipment." Thorne didn't see nature photographer. He saw casing targets. His confirmation bias kicked into overdrive. He knew this park. He knew the residents were wealthy and vocal. If there was a guy in a suit taking pictures of houses, it was probably a private investigator working without a license, or worse, a sophisticated burglary crew scout. Thorne felt a surge of adrenaline. This was a chance to be proactive. He threw his patrol car into drive and sped toward Oak Haven Park, his mind already made up. He wasn't going to have a chat. He was going to stop a crime. Officer Thorne's patrol car hopped the curb and rolled onto the grass of Oak Haven Park, coming to a halt just 20 feet from where Marcus Sterling stood. The aggressive arrival was a tactical choice. Thorne wanted to establish dominance immediately. He stepped out of the vehicle, leaving the door open, and marched toward the pond. His hand rested near his holster, not drawing the weapon, but telegraphing readiness. Sterling heard the engine and the crunch of tires on grass. He didn't turn immediately. He was tracking a mallard that was just beginning to taxi across the water. He pressed the shutter button, the camera firing a silent burst of 20 frames per second. Only when the bird was airborne did Sterling straighten his back and turn to face the intrusion. He saw the young officer storming toward him, face set in a scowl behind aviator sunglasses. Sterling sighed internally. He knew this walk. He had reviewed hundreds of hours of body cam footage in his career. He knew exactly what was coming. "Partner, step away from the equipment," Thorne barked, stopping 6 feet away. Sterling remained calm, his hands visible at his sides. He didn't step away. The camera was worth $12,000. He wasn't leaving it unattended. "Good morning, officer," Sterling said, his voice a rich baritone polished by decades of public speaking. "Is there a problem? You drove onto the landscaping." Thorne ignored the comment about his driving. "I said step away from the camera. What are you doing out here?" "I'm photographing the wildlife," Sterling said, gesturing slightly to the pond. "The migration patterns are particularly active today." "Wildlife?" Thorne repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "We got a call you're taking pictures of the houses, conducting surveillance on the neighborhood. You want to explain that?" Sterling looked at the officer, really looked at him. He saw the lack of stripes on the sleeve, the aggressive stance, the nameplate, D. Thorne. "Officer Thorne," Sterling said, "I am using a 600mm lens. It has a narrow field of view designed for small subjects at a distance. If I were photographing houses, I would be using a wide-angle lens. Furthermore, I am in a public park. Photography is a protected First Amendment activity. I haven't pointed this camera at any residents." Thorne stepped closer, invading Sterling's personal space. He didn't like being lectured on lenses or the Constitution. He liked compliance. "You got a lot of answers, huh? You a lawyer?" "I am a federal official," Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious. "And I am telling you, you are mistaken. I am on my lunch break. I am bothering no one." "Federal official?" Thorne scoffed. "Right. And I'm the police commissioner. Listen, I need to see some ID. Now." Sterling stood his ground. He knew the law perfectly. "Officer, have I committed a crime? Do you have reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime? Because filming ducks while black is not a crime in this state. Unless you can articulate a crime, this is a consensual encounter, and I am declining to provide identification." Thorne's face reddened. This was the moment the switch flipped. He wasn't listening to the logic. He was hearing defiance. He was hearing a suspect trying to talk his way out of an investigation. "You're detained," Thorne snapped. "Investigation of trespassing and disorderly conduct. Give me your ID or you're going in." The air in the park seemed to freeze. Several people walking their dogs had stopped. A woman on a bench nearby lowered her sandwich and pulled out her phone. The audience was assembling, but Officer Thorne was too focused on the man in the suit to notice. "Officer Thorne," Sterling said, his voice steady but carrying an edge of warning. "I am giving you an opportunity to de-escalate this. I am the senior media advisor for the Department of Justice, Western District. My credentials are in my pocket. If you detain me without probable cause, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights and opening this city up to a massive liability claim. I am asking you to verify my statement before you touch me." It was a clear, lucid warning. It was the truth offered on a platter. But Thorne's ego had created a deafness to reason. To Thorne, Sterling's claim sounded like a grandiose lie. Department of Justice in a park. Taking pictures of ducks. It didn't fit Thorne's profile of a federal agent. Federal agents drove SUVs and wore tactical gear. They didn't stand by ponds talking about lens apertures. "I don't care who you say you are," Thorne said, reaching for his handcuffs. "You refused a lawful order. You're failing to identify during an investigation." "There is no investigation," Sterling countered, not moving. "You are fishing. You are acting on a bias-based complaint from a neighbor. That is not reasonable suspicion. This is a Terry stop violation." "Turn around," Thorne commanded, unholstering his taser and pointing it at the ground. "Do it now." Sterling looked at the taser, then at Thorne's eyes. He saw the panic masking as aggression. He knew that if he moved too fast, Thorne might shoot. He knew that even DOJ credentials wouldn't stop a bullet. "I am complying under duress," Sterling announced loudly, ensuring the witnesses and Thorne's body camera picked it up. "I am not resisting. I am stating for the record that this arrest is unlawful." "Put your hands behind your back," Thorne yelled, stepping in to grab Sterling's wrist. As Thorne grabbed him, he shoved Sterling hard against the tripod. The heavy rig, unbalanced by the force, tipped over. Sterling watched in slow motion as his $12,000 set up the Canon R3 and the 600mm lens crashed onto the concrete path. The sound of shattering glass was sickeningly loud. "My camera," Sterling said, his voice tightening. "You just destroyed federal property." "Stop resisting," Thorne shouted, though Sterling hadn't moved a muscle. Thorne twisted Sterling's arm up behind his back with unnecessary force, applying a leverage hold designed to inflict pain. "I am not resisting," Sterling gritted out through the pain in his shoulder. "Officer, you are making a career-ending mistake. Check my pocket. My badge is in my left breast pocket." "I'll check it when you're in the car," Thorne spat, snapping the handcuffs onto Sterling's wrists. The metal clicked tight. Thorne didn't double-lock them. He yanked Sterling away from the wreckage of the camera, marching him toward the cruiser. "You're done," Thorne muttered. "Impersonating an officer, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct. You're going to have a long day, pal." Sterling walked with dignity despite the cuffs. He looked at the woman filming with her phone and nodded. "Please keep recording," Sterling said to her. "Do not stop." "Shut up," Thorne said, shoving Sterling toward the back seat. The back of a police cruiser is a humiliating place designed to strip a person of their agency. The hard plastic seat, the cage, the smell of stale sweat and disinfectant. Marcus Sterling sat awkwardly, his hands numb from the tight cuffs, watching the park disappear as Thorne peeled out once again, driving recklessly over the grass to get back to the pavement. Sterling closed his eyes and began to catalog the offenses: unlawful detention, excessive force, destruction of property, failure to verify credentials, false imprisonment. He wasn't just angry. He was professionally disappointed. He had spent years working with police chiefs to eradicate exactly this kind of behavior. He had written the press releases promising reform, and here he was, a victim of the very culture he was trying to fix. Thorne was silent in the front seat, adrenaline fading, replaced by a simmering anger. He felt righteous. He had caught a guy casing the neighborhood who claimed to be a Fed. He was already rehearsing his report. Subject was belligerent, claimed false status, refused ID. Thorne didn't check the credentials in Sterling's pocket. He didn't want to know. He wanted to book him and let the detectives sort it out. The drive to the Metro precinct took 15 minutes. Sterling didn't speak. He knew anything he said now would be twisted. He saved his words for someone who mattered. When they pulled into the Sallyport, Thorne hauled Sterling out. "Let's go. Central booking." They walked into the station, past the holding cells to the intake desk. The sergeant on duty was Thomas Miller, a 55-year-old veteran who was 6 months away from retirement. Miller had seen everything. He looked up over his reading glasses as Thorne paraded Sterling in. Miller frowned. He saw the cut of Sterling's suit. He saw the expensive Italian shoes. He saw the calm, icy rage in Sterling's eyes. And he saw Thorne looking sweaty and manic. "What do we have, Thorne?" Miller asked, his voice weary. "Trespassing, disorderly resisting," Thorne said, dumping Sterling's personal items on the counter, a wallet, a phone, and a set of keys. "Guy was casing houses in Oakhaven, refused ID, claimed he was DOJ. Thorne laughed a little. "Impersonation, too." Miller looked at Sterling. "You claim DOJ." "I didn't claim it, Sergeant," Sterling said, his voice filling the intake room. "I am the senior media advisor for the Western District. My credentials are in the leather case you just threw on the counter. I suggest you open it before Officer Thorne processes any paperwork." Miller paused. He looked at Thorne, who was smirking. Then he looked at the wallet. He reached out and flipped it open. The room went silent. There was the gold badge, heavy and authentic. There was the photo ID. United States Department of Justice, Marcus Sterling, Senior Advisor. Miller stared at it for a long 5 seconds. The blood drained from his face. He looked at the holographic seal. It was real. He knew it was real. He looked up at Thorne. The smirk was gone from Thorne's face, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Thorne?" Miller whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Did you verify this?" He wouldn't show it to me. He was resisting." "He's in cuffs," Miller barked suddenly, standing up. "Uncuff him, now." The sound of the keys in the handcuffs was the loudest thing in the room. Thorne's hands were shaking as he unlocked the mechanism. He was beginning to understand the magnitude of his error. The invincibility was cracking. Sterling rubbed his wrists. Deep red grooves were etched into his dark skin. He didn't say thank you. He looked at Sergeant Miller. "Sergeant, I want a photographer down here to document these injuries. I want a lieutenant or higher present immediately, and I want my phone." Miller nodded rapidly. "Yes, sir. Right away." "Sir, I apologize." "Save it," Sterling said. "You have a rogue officer who just destroyed federal property and kidnapped a federal employee. Who is your watch commander?" "Lieutenant Davidson is coming down now," Miller said. He handed Sterling his phone. Sterling unlocked it and made one call. He put it on speaker. "Attorney General's Office, Western District." "This is Sterling," Marcus said. "I need you to get the U.S. Attorney on the line. I've been arrested by Seattle PD, false imprisonment. They smashed the cannon." There was a gasp on the other end. "Where are you?" "Metro Precinct. Get the press release draft ready. Headline: DOJ advisor arrested for photography. I'll fill in the quotes later." He hung up. Lieutenant Davidson arrived 2 minutes later, looking like he had just swallowed a rock. He took one look at the credentials, one look at Sterling, and then turned a gaze of pure incineration onto Officer Thorne. "Thorne badge and gun. On the desk. Now." "Lou, he was suspicious," Thorne stammered. "You arrested the guy who writes the press releases for the FBI," Davidson shouted. "You destroyed a $12,000 camera because you didn't like his tone badge. Gun, now." Thorne placed his badge and his service weapon on the counter. He looked small. The armor of the uniform was gone. He was just a 34-year-old man who had bullied the wrong person. Sterling watched him. "Officer Thorne," he said quietly. "You asked me if I was a lawyer earlier. I'm not, but I hire the lawyers who sue departments like yours into the ground. You didn't just ruin your career today. You bankrupted your city." Thorne was escorted out of the building, placed on immediate administrative leave. Sterling was driven back to his car by the lieutenant personally. They found the camera on the path where Thorne had left it. The lens was shattered, the body cracked. Sterling picked it up, the weight of the broken glass symbolic of the trust that had been broken that day. The fallout was nuclear. Within 24 hours, the video from the bystander hit the internet. It showed everything: the calm demeanor of Sterling, the aggression of Thorne, the smash of the camera, the unlawful arrest. The headline wrote itself: Cop destroys camera, arrests DOJ. Official for filming ducks. The lawsuit was filed 3 weeks later. It named Derek Thorne, the city, and the police department. It alleged violations of the First and Fourth Amendments, assault, battery, and false imprisonment. The city attorney took one look at the video, then at Sterling's credentials, and told the mayor to open the checkbook. There was no defense. Qualified immunity did not apply because the right to record in public was clearly established, and Thorne's refusal to verify credentials showed willful malice. The settlement was reached in 14 months, $6.8 million. It was the largest individual payout for a wrongful arrest in the city's history. Derek Thorne was fired. He was stripped of his certification, ensuring he could never work as a police officer in the state again. The casing narrative he tried to spin fell apart when the GPS data from Sterling's camera proved he was only pointing it at the pond. Thorne is currently working in private security at a warehouse, making a fraction of his former salary. But money and firings don't fix the underlying rot. 6 months after the settlement, Marcus Sterling returned to Oak Haven Park. He had a new camera, a newer model Canon. The sun was shining. The ducks were there. He set up the tripod. He looked through the viewfinder. But the feeling was different. The peace was gone. He found himself looking over his shoulder every time a car drove by. He found himself listening for sirens. The trauma of being stripped of your rights, of being manhandled and caged, doesn't vanish with a settlement check. Even for a man with the power of the DOJ behind him, the vulnerability remained. Sterling took a photo of a solitary mallard drifting on the water. It was a beautiful shot, but he didn't smile. He packed up his gear after 10 minutes. He couldn't stay. The park wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the memory of Officer Thorne and the bias that had summoned him. As Sterling walked to his car, he passed a young father teaching his son how to fish. The father looked up and smiled. Sterling nodded back, but he kept walking. He drove away, leaving the park quiet, the willows swaying in the wind, indifferent to the lives that had been altered beneath their branches. This story forces us to ask a difficult question. If a high-ranking federal official can be arrested for filming ducks, what happens to the citizen who has no badge, no connections, and no camera rolling? Do you think officers should be personally liable for settlements when they violate constitutional rights? Or should the taxpayers continue to foot the bill? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe in holding power accountable, share this video. Until next time, stay safe and know your rights.